All right. Well, up first this morning then is George Twohig from Marquette University.
Thanks, and thank you all for coming to listen to my spiel here. I'll jump right into it. Digital media is often portrayed as a disruptive force, but I would argue that digital media is just another technological advancement, just like the printing press or the radio. And its rapid adoption and sustained use is driven more by our desire to share experiences and maintain social relationships. Basically, digital media is our human interconnection. Whatever is occurring culturally, politically, and spiritually becomes measurable in its rhythms. Digital communication shows what we affirm, what we mock, and what we refuse to hear. This paper itself participates in a larger project I'm doing that examines the recognition of human solidarity, specifically in the areas of digital communication. It also argues that contemporary fragmentation we see is best understood as a crisis of subjectivity under the conditions of this technology. Drawing on Lonergan's account of consciousness and belief, I propose that human solidarity depends upon a shared normative structure of knowing, and that this structure becomes historically effective through belief as socially mediated assent. Communication is not a mere afterthought to cognition. It is the medium through which belief becomes our communal inheritance, through which our credibility is stabilized or corroded, through which inquiry is either sustained across time or deformed as adversarial performance. Digital media can mediate genuine goods, right? It creates platforms for marginalized voices. It enables dialogue across distances. It's there for the coordination of justice and communities of learning and care and new forms of witness. But digital space is not neutral space. It conditions attention through its curation. It conditions understanding through acceleration, judgment through metrics and identity cues, and action through its incentives. To interact digitally, therefore, is to act within an ecology that shapes the operations by which one believes. It is participation in the formation of communal horizons that either sustain or erode the recognition of human solidarity. So this paper unfolds in basically three movements. First, addressing the treatment of online communication as detachable from real life. This false binary, I believe, fragments the unity of the acting subject. It's basically a licensing of the online self as experienced as a provisional performance alongside a real self that is presumed to bear responsibility. It also addresses advertisation and a drift towards narrative substitution, in which coherence is sought less through shared inquiry than through ideological belonging. Second movement, we look into how digital communication, where credibility markers are flattened and popularity mimics authority. So the mechanisms of belief formation become both accelerated and destabilized in digital communication. Third, it finally presents a proposed constructive response, a praxis grounded in Lonerganian conversion and oriented towards a contemporary digitally influenced view of Cosmopolis. So moving into that, the key conceptual tension is this digital communication treated as a detachable sphere, if you will, rather than an integrated part of our human dynamism, our real, if you will, with the quotes, lives. So when digital presence is assumed to be less real or less accountable, one permits a split between their online self as experienced performance, if you will, and a real self that bears responsibility. This division functions as, well, technically as almost moral dispensation for our online actions. The result is not simply hypocrisy, but it becomes a weakening of our own personal agency. Turkle's 95 analysis of identity construction in network spaces highlighted how these environments encourage experimentation in selfhood, the experience of multiple selves, if you will. These experiments loosened the continuity, or proved the loosening of a continuity between the projected persona and the actual agent. when digital communication is framed as detachable, when we take in that false binary, the person's moral and epistemic life basically is implicitly fractured. This fracture then becomes intensified by avatarization, which is the reduction of persons to curated representations, such as seeing people as profiles or specifically just stances or signals. In digital content, the other is often transformed into a type, rather than approached as a co-subject capable of insight and sincerity. The more the other is experienced as a projection, the more communication tends to become strategic, rather than a movement toward shared understanding. In these detachments, trust migrates away from persons and institutions of inquiry towards narratives and ideologies to supply coherence. The credibility judgment becomes less reflective evaluation of testimony and warrants and more an affective reflex. Does this fit the story of us versus them? It becomes the question. When the incentives favor rapid sorting and performative certainty, narratives function as substitutes for inquiry. We see the results as polarization, right? But really, I believe it's an erosion of trust in the possibility of a common criteria for adjudicating truth claims. At this point, in which the subject center of agency has become vulnerable to displacement, what feels like participation is really a functioned, conditioned response, if you will, within this technologically structured field. The environment trains the user towards immediacy and visibility, maximizing behavior. The operations by which human knowing ordinarily proceeds becomes increasingly outsourced to the ecology itself. Attentiveness is guided by algorithmic curation. Understanding is compressed by short-form acceleration. Judgment is pulled towards metrics. And responsibility is reduced to performance or belonging, right? The danger is not that the subject ceases to choose, but that the subject's choosing is increasingly pre-shaped, if you will, by the economy that rewards the counter-precepts. Lonergan's insistence on the invariant structure of human knowing provides a conceptual leverage to diagnose the situation, without either romancing a pre-digital form of communication or scapegoating the technology itself. What human beings share most fundamentally is not content, right? It's the normative dynamism of knowing. The drive to be attentive, intelligent, reasonable, responsible, all grounded in the possibility of common meaning, precisely because they are not culturally based. But it's the conditions of judgment and mutual integrity, mutual intelligibility, if you will. The task, therefore, is not to retreat from digital mediation, but to reintegrate online speech into the same horizons of accountability, inquiry, and love that constitute any truthful human dialogue. In method, Lonergan presents belief as a rationally structured and socially mediated mode of assent, without which communal life would be impossible. Belief emerges from the recognition that human knowing is intrinsically collaborative. No individual verifies from first principles, right? The totality of what he or she responsibly affirms. To believe is to participate in a structured economy of mediated trust. The act of believing involves a judgment of credibility regarding the witness and an affirmation grounded in the normative operations of consciousness. It's an attentiveness to testimony or intelligent grasp of its meaning, reasonable evaluation of the plausibility, and responsible assent, then, in light of the evidence. Without belief, every subject would be trapped within the narrow limits of personal verification. So belief is the very medium by which insight becomes inheritance. It enables the coordination of action, the stabilization of meaning, and the extension of responsibility beyond the present moment. Belief judgments, they sediment into structures that shape the possibilities available for our next generations. Lonergan describes progress and decline, of course, as potential outcomes rooted in the quality of subjectivity, where authentic belief now contributes to a more adequate understanding, more just institutions, a more coherent communal life. When bias is introduced, the normative structure becomes distorted. Beliefs form under such pressure but they do not remain private. Because belief is socially mediated, in historically operative, distorted beliefs stabilize misunderstanding, coordinate unjust action, and entrench patterns that resist correction. Digital communication functions essentially as an intensified machinery for belief circulation and stabilization. Testimony today travels instantaneously across vast networks. Credibility judgments are performed publicly, and assent is often quantified through metrics. Metrics of visibility and engagement, right? In this sense, the digital environment doesn't create belief like ex nihilo, but magnifies its historical efficiency. Digital media amplifies the consequences of bias, but it also amplifies the potential of authenticity when it's circulated. Digital communication is better seen as a diagnostic tool, I think, rather than determinative of our subjectivity. It reveals in concentrated form the underlying quality of subjectivity, operative within the community itself. The recognition of human solidarity requires shared confidence in the normative structure of knowing. So to live together in a community oriented toward the common good presupposes trust that truth is real and can be sought together. It's based on knowledge that inquiry is not arbitrary, that reality is intelligible, and that our interlocutors participate in the same basic operations of understanding and judgment. So each act of assent contributes to this ecology of credibility. Within others must judge and act, and every distortion participates in shaping horizons. The digital age intensifies our responsibility. When communication becomes instantaneous and globally networked, the sedimentation of belief into history accelerates, right? The question is whether the beliefs become stabilizing, arising from our authenticity, or our authentic subjectivity, or from our amplified bias, either reinforced by the technological amplification. So, communication, of course, stands as Lonergan's eighth and kind of culminating functional specialty, gathering into public mediation the prior labors of research. This structural placement embodies a thesis, I think, about communication itself. Belief becomes historical when personal judgments enter the public sphere, encounter other judgments, and then participate in the ongoing genesis of common meaning. Communication, therefore, is not the dissemination of already completed insights, but the dynamic field in which insights are received, tested, appropriated, revised, and transmitted. It is the medium through which belief becomes socially operative. So when communication functions authentically, it fosters solidarity. Personal insights become communal resources, and disagreements become dialectical as the trajectory of inquiry remain open to revision in light of further understanding. When biases infiltrate, right, socially, this breakdown appears to us as fragmentation. At a cognitional level, it reflects a collapse of the transcendental precepts into their counterforms. When contemporary digital discourse often labels what contemporary digital discourse labels as, say, hot takes or tribal certainty or even strategic messaging are not merely stylistic shifts, but they're symptomatic distortions in the operations of which belief is formed and shared. Which then raises the pressing question: what occurs when the public sphere itself is increasingly structured to reward counter-precepts? And therefore, digital mediation must be assessed in terms of how it conditions attentiveness, intelligence, reasonableness, and responsibility. So at the level of attentiveness, the field of experience, of course, is curated. Digital infrastructures select, rank, and frame what counts as data. That's filtered. Interruption, notification cycles, and infinite scrolling architectures capture our attention rather than our contemplation. Attentiveness becomes increasingly reactive, pulled by stimuli rather than directed by inquiry. At the level of understanding, digital acceleration compresses the conditions necessary for insight. Psychologically imposed brevity and immediacy habituate subjects towards closure. When understanding thins, judgment is correspondingly reshaped. increasingly influenced by all these exterior markers, like metrics of popularity, consensus signaling within your enclave, symbolic capital of influencers. The operative question shifts from is it so to is it trending? Reasonableness basically is reduced to visibility and virality, and credibility becomes conflated with amplification. Assent basically risks becoming an echo of the collected effect rather than the deliberate fruit of judgment. Finally, at the level of responsibility, the ethical horizons narrow towards strategic self-presentation. The question becomes, how will this enhance my standing, signal my alignment, secure approval, make me a better influencer, if you will? Being responsible gives way to being seen. The critical point in this analysis is not the perception of a technological determinism. Critical realism resists the temptation to scapegoat platforms as if subjects were merely passive recipients or structural forces, right? Objectivity is not achieved by escaping mediation, but by appropriating one's operations within it. The task to inhabit communication environments consciously, recognizing how mediation shapes operations, and reclaiming the normative structure of knowing within those conditions. Digital scholarship increasingly describes communication, a structured environment within which meaning is produced, credibility negotiated, and social reality is maintained. Here, hold on. Whoop. Oh, sorry. Yeah, slides weren't that important, don't worry about it. Recent scholarship increasingly describes digital communication, a structured environment in which meaning is produced, credibility maintained, and social reality maintained, right? The thesis in the book, The Mediated Construction of Reality of 2017, is that media infrastructures now function as the primary milieu in which social reality is constructed and sustained. Network platforms do not merely transmit pre-existing realities, they shape the processes through which they're interpreted, stabilized, and contested. McLuhan argued that media forms reorganize perception and social coordination independent of content. And Logan and Rowdy extend this insight by describing social media platforms as memory systems and perception filters, functioning as vast and externalized repositories while simultaneously filtering perception. In essence, digital environments can habituate subjects towards particular modes of seeing and remembering. The ecology becomes formative of our own rationality. Then looking at constructivist communication theory, it further illuminates this dynamic. Leah Leveroux argues that media technologies shape not only distribution, but symbolic production and interpretive communities. Meaning does not precede mediation, it emerges within the communicative systems and enables certain narratives, identities, and solidarities within groups to coalesce. Berger and Luckman's foundational claim that social reality becomes durable and shared meaning is when shared meaning is repeatedly enacted, receives renewed relevance in digital contexts. Basically, the categories of expert, influencer, enemy, or ally become stabilized through repetition and recognition in these digital platforms. Beliefs becomes historically operated when it is embedded in these routines. What circulates widely acquires an aura of legitimacy. But to describe digital communication as constitutive of perception and belief is not to deny the individual agency. Rather, it is to recognize that authentic subjects must be exercised within the authentic subjectivity must be exercised within these structured environments. To recognize human solidarity is therefore to structure our operations within communication conditions in a way which humanity can extend insight across differentiation and sustain confidence that truth remains accessible through shared inquiry. There's a pattern observable in contemporary culture that does not seem to support this trajectory. Lonergan names this deformation general bias, a systematic suspicion of theory, a suspicion of reflexive insight, an avoidance of long cycle intelligence in favor of immediacy, practicality, and short-term solutions. The prominent signals of this distortion is the emergence of fragmented epistemologies. Plurality of interpretive frameworks has always characterized complex societies, but the challenge of the present moment lies in the weakening of shared norms for our adjudication of truth claims across those differences. Competing viewpoints increasingly fail to recognize common criteria of rationality. Claims are evaluated according to internal group coherence and without the criteria of attentiveness, intelligence, responsibility. Disagreement becomes self-reinforcing. This epistemic fragmentation directly contributes to an erosion of civil discourse, which presupposes the basic conviction that reality is intelligible and that our interlocutors are capable of insight. When meta-beliefs about truths fail, the other is no longer approached as a co-inquirer. The digital environment intensifies this shift by structuring communication around visibility metrics, where beliefs are often signaled. So when these patterns persist, a deeper cultural mood emerges, which is cynicism towards truth itself. Individuals are now beginning to suspect that all claims are strategic, that evidence is endlessly manipulable, and that the act of inquiry is actually futile, which is a retreat from the project of understanding altogether. The result is a weakening of the bonds that unite subjectivity in a common intelligible world. And this condition cannot be remedied through technological adjustment. While the platform design influences patterns of attention, the deeper crisis concerns subjectivity itself. It involves reawakening the confidence that reflective insight matters and that long cycle intelligence is not futile. The crisis of digital fragmentation confronts us with the question of whether we will still believe in the project of understanding itself. We need a radical reorientation, not a nostalgic return to pre-digital forms, but an intentional cultivation of the orientation that moves us away from self-referential signaling, right, towards a horizon shaped by truth, value, and love. So if digital fragmentation is ultimately a crisis of subjectivity, then the task is self-appropriation and the recognition of authentic subjectivity within digital mediation. So in digital contexts, intellectual conversion would be the retrieval of our critical interiority against the externalization of attention. It's the reflexive question of why am I seeing this and what remains unseen. Moral conversion speaks to reclaiming the other as subject, but admittedly the presence of bots and coordinated inauthentic behavior and strategic manipulation complicate the presupposition of authenticity in digital communication. But just because suspicion becomes habitual, our moral responsibility must extend beyond the immediate exchange to the recognition of one's participation in shaping the communal horizon of belief. And finally, religious conversion, of course, reorders the horizon of value by orienting the subject towards ultimate concern, towards that which transcends ego and situates all lesser goods within a larger horizon of meaning. So if conversion retrieves subjectivity, collectively the recognition of human solidarity could be its social fruit. In Insight, Lonergan introduces cosmopolis, the higher viewpoint and critical cultural function that resists bias by making intelligence and responsible judgment socially effective. If digital environments amplify impatience with theory, suspicion of reflection, privileging of immediacy, and anti-dialectical mood, if belief is the social transmission of mediated trust, and if channels of mediation reward virality over veracity, then Cosmopolis names the responsibility to reconstitute communicative environments in which authenticity can be plausible. So translated into digital practice, because these transforms can't be merely external, I recommend, or I would say that we need several modest but actionable practices, right? We need to establish norms against constant responsiveness in our digital communication. Digital immediacy does not dictate assent. Establishing communal permission to delay responses introduces space for reflection. We need to practice interpretive charity. Reconstructing the other's claim in its strongest form before critique is basically a fidelity to intelligence. We need to explicitly separate visibility from credibility, restore the shared criteria for judgment. We need to ask why, requesting warrants, context, and evidence. We need to take responsibility for the communal horizon, each communication actively shaping our conditions of belief. And finally, we have to realize that technological determinism is constituted by our behavior. What we reward with attention is what's amplified. So when we choose depth over outrage and sustained inquiry over spectacle, it subtly reshapes the ecology itself. Platforms will start to mirror the collective engagement of our patterns. I mean, these practices do not promise a perfect digital polis, but they represent rather a retrieval within history, a way of rendering higher viewpoints digitally effective. So solidarity in pluralism can't be engineered, but it could be cultivated. So if belief remains the medium of historical agency, then its reconstruction depends upon us as subjects, willing to appropriate our operations, and communities willing to sustain the conditions of authentic inquiry. Thank you.
You want to handle your own?
Sure, happy to. Yeah.
No, are you sure? No, go. Thanks so much. I mean, it was so rich and well thought out that I can't resist asking this question because the first part, or as you ended as well, the regaining or appropriating the control of meaning and imminent operations. Norms, I should say. But let me, since I put on my Cartesian hat yesterday, let me put on my Marxist hat for a bit, because you seem to sort of, I don't know, there's an analogy that I'm just not comfortable with the printing press. Because this is different, isn't it? In other words, the control of meaning is shifted into a horizon. You know, people were able to figure out how to build their own printing press, and Marx can make pamphlets and disrupt the sort of control of meaning. It's still an issue of newspapers. This is why people are buying newspapers, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it's mostly digital now. This is almost impossible with the infrastructure of digital media. In other words, the control of meaning is so different. They're not just controlling, right? They're controlling our horizon, what appears to us. And in other words, I just don't see the possibility of building, we'd have to build our own infrastructure in order to shift this control. That's not to say, I mean, I agree with everything you said about basically self-appropriation, I think. But this is just a different problem.
Well, so
shortchange that issue.
No, I get what you're saying, and I think I agree to some degree, but there's this thing we do. I think in every era, we consider ourselves in this unprecedented change, right? And I think we saw this during COVID, if you will. Like this, you know, we've never dealt with this before, but nobody remembered the Spanish flu. It was basically the same thing. But it was a new challenge to a new people. And I think that's where I'm saying this is, in many ways, I mean, I'm just trying to remember where I saw this. In many ways, people had the same fears with the printing press, with the radio, with the ability to disseminate information and people having access to creating their own information and getting it out there. And yeah, it will undermine trust. There will be bad ideas that get out there. And we now have to be more cognizant and more understanding that not everything is true, right? But I don't think any more so because there's more information.
Just because, thank you.
No, yeah.
But the radio, you can build your own operation after a while, right? And the radio waves are free.
Right.
It's not the case with the internet, right? In other words, you think of like AI, there's 4 or 5 men who control how these work.
Right.
And you know, we had this idea at Boston College. I remember in this meeting, we'll build our own AI. And then we had consultants that came in for millions. They said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not possible. It would cost billions of dollars. And that's just a different problem than the ones that you're describing here, right? Like, it's a different infrastructure. Or is it not?
To me, it's more intensified infrastructure. It's different in that it's more intensified. It offers a lot of the same things. But yeah, it's billions of dollars now into the hundreds of dollars of building a printing press or whatever the difference would be at that time, right? But I think essentially we have to still recognize that in either given situation, The technology out there is just the technology. It is not what shapes us. We're what shape the technology. When we remove our agency and put it into the hands of the technology, I mean, I think AI is an amazing tool. But then again, I'm not going to use it to write a paper, but I'll use it to create a spreadsheet with my class list and the assignments across it because I don't want to take the time to make all the columns, and it'll do that. I mean, I think we're going to find that AI just becomes a way to do those menial tasks that we don't want to do. I don't want to look for a picture, just make me a picture of a dude walking through the park, right? And I don't know that I don't think it's going to make that big a change other than it's going to become the next calculator. And I get what you're saying. It seems like it's totally shifting the entire dynamic of our lives. And it will, because it's a whole new thing, much the same way other technological advancements did, airplanes, electricity, other things. But it's a tool we made for us. And we didn't make it for altruistic reasons, right? Like the guys who built it wanted to make money. But so did the guys that built the airplane. I mean, the Wright brothers had a failing bicycle shop. It was the next thing they wanted to do, right? Our thing is, how do we use them? Do we use it to increase our human interconnection? Because that's why I think it's as popular as it is. Go ahead.
Well, it dovetails nicely, I think, Andrew, with the point you're making, because my read is that the analysis that you've provided, which was very good, by the way, I really appreciate it, and I love that you went first. I'm more on that shortly. I'm not sure that it changes the direction of what he's talking about in terms of the pivot within this new ecology. Okay?
Right.
So, but my question is, all right, there are demands on us as individuals and as users and as people that can contribute to perhaps a more equitable, wholesome, whatever ecosystem.
Yeah.
Lower blade. But I'd invite you to think about an upper blade. So, there's got, so again, if there's 4 guys that are controlling it, that is an unprecedented scale of control concentrated in a few hands. So on that point, I very much agree with Andrew's point. But I'd love for you to speculate a little bit on, what I've been thinking about specifically how, like, Australia has banned social media for kids under 16.
Sure.
That seems like one pivot that to me feels more like a systemic response to say that the ecosystem could potentially be very destructive.
Oh, and I think it speaks to just what I'm saying. I think if you notice, it's the ban there or the lawsuit against Meta that just happened. These are all dealing with children, right? We're talking about kids, minors. The basis of the lawsuit is they were not cognitively developed enough to deal with this. And what I'm saying is, as adults, unless we recognize these things, we're not cognitively developed enough.
Right.
And so I agree with you. This is where the demand, the responsibility is much greater. But in the same level, I think that's what we have to recognize. The demand to operate authentically in these environments now has increased costs to ourselves and to the community at large. And I think that's what drove not letting minors on there. I mean, there's all sorts of other, the release of dopamine using things. Those kind of things affect people so much that we have to fight back against the addiction of online affirmation, if you will.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
The point about dopamine raises, because I liked the place you started about the construction of the self and the integration of the self, because I think that's really important. I think my own experience of using social media is so much of the discourse involved is about ego maintenance.
Yeah.
But in that case, then there's a kind of another there's a kind of parallel set of concerns about affectivity.
Yeah.
That I don't think anything you said negates, but you didn't address directly. I mean, I think about like Alan Shore sort of kicked off this whole school of interpersonal neuropsychology and affect regulation and the construction or the creation of the self, or the book's called. And one of the things I notice about using these devices is that because of the mediation of meaning, I can have highly affectively dysregulating interpersonal experiences.
Right.
But I don't have the mammalian regulation system of body-to-body attunement
Not
that
at
I
all.
would have if you and I got into a disagreement right now.
Right, absolutely.
And so I get dysregulated because all I have is this glowing screen.
Yeah.
So how do you see the sort of affective, that other way of being conscious integrated with the kind of cognitive piece you spelled out in such lovely detail?
Well, I think the affective level, and that's where I'm talking about, we have to kind of establish time as a norm. We have to remove the responsivity that we feel, the brevity that's pushed by social media. I mean, if I get a text, for some reason right now, I feel I have to get back to that text. If I heard my phone bing, I'd probably run over there even though I'm doing this.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know why, and I think culturally we've just gotten to if I can get it to you immediately, you should get back to me immediately. I mean, and I don't want to go back to, thinking about pre-digital forms and stuff, but I mean, you used to call someone and you'd leave a message, maybe you'd hear back tomorrow,
Right.
And now people get mad if you don't do it right away. And it intensifies and intensifies the more that communication goes. So when you get to whether something's trending on Facebook or Twitter or now it's like you feel you have to respond right away or you're not going to be in that trending topic, right? And I think that's where like the first thing is we just have to create almost a cultural normative thing of every time I read something, we all step back. We're not going to respond right away because it is pulling at our effective responses.
Can I press on that just a
Yeah,
little bit?
please.
Because to me that does suggest, look, I mean, I'm affirmative of what you're saying about sort of the integration of the self in the sort of these different nodes of the world mediated by meaning. But doesn't that suggest that, I mean, there is a kind of like, there is something to like IRL touch grass. Like there's some like
Oh, absolutely.
there is a realness to the embodied way of being that's not available in the digital space.
I would say absolutely, completely.
That really has weight in terms of integration of self.
Yes.
So how do you like? I appreciate on the one hand saying like we can't have we can't underwrite this fragmentation, but also like one of these things has this sort of greater mass.
Right.
So how do those two pieces fit together?
Well, I think we recognize that. I mean, it's the same reason those of you that flew in here because this is an experience that works better in real life.
Sure.
If you had to call it in for whatever reason, that's another option, but it doesn't get you the same interaction. It doesn't get you the same feeling with people, right? Or I can send out group chats to all my buddies from high school. It's not as much fun as sitting around and picking a fantasy football team with them, right? But it is, so I'm not saying that we're choosing the digital communication over the embodied communication, but it's the next best available thing. It's filling a void that we're feeling, right? Which I think is almost a transcendental void for unity, right? Like it helps us bring that in, but not in the fullest sense. And I think that's where we have to recognize that it's not in the fullest sense. Because when you're standing in front of your buddy, you can give him some crap, and he knows you're giving him crap, but if you do it on Facebook, everyone sees that you just called him something you don't want to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It becomes a different thing, and I think we're like kids on the playground with digital media right now. We haven't even developed our normative way to operate in it, And I think that happens with every technology. And I think as this one's more intense, as AI comes in and that's more intense, we don't even know what to deal with. But we have to start looking at ways to regulate ourselves and to maintain who we are.
We have time for one more?
Yeah.
I pick up maybe a thread of what Jonathan was asking, and I think about like the cosmopolis you're talking about. I was thinking like, all right, so what does that look like online? Maybe in the past it was Twitter, and then people said, this is toxic, I don't want to be here, so we're going to set up Blue Sky.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes sort of like Team Red, Team Blue.
Yeah.
Are there multiple cosmopolis? Is it the recognition that these are not working, and so we need to like go back to in IRL context? Like, where does the cosmopolis exist?
Well, I think it would almost have to flow across different platforms because those platforms change as people want to invent something new or don't like what's there. I mean, I think it's hilarious because the public literally people throw out digital, think of it like a Snapchat, right? Snapchat's whole thing was like, you can't save this. That's why it's good. And so everyone got it and started doing screenshots, but it was the next place, you know, the public's gonna manipulate the system that's out there. And it's really how do we inhabit that system in a way that's better. So I don't think I'm saying as a group of authentic subjects should pick one and only operate there. I think we need to operate across the broad spectrum, if you will, of wherever we are. If it's digital communication, if it's social media, if it's sending an email, or if it's you know whatever it is. Does that answer?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to ask is like, say the next best thing in real life thing is text groups and things. But I wonder that during COVID, that dread unnamed thing, the unpleasantness, we sort of delayed return to in-school thing because like, well, we can just go online. And you just wonder if the technology doesn't serve as a convenient crutch for us from going back. And you're like, well, we can do this, so why rush back? So like in that calculus of safety versus need to return to inhuman contact, and we look back on it and say like, well, we probably should have gotten back in person.
As fast as you could, yeah.
It wasn't learning happening,
Yeah.
Despite wonderful technology. I don't know. I'm just being kind of a playful,
No, I think that's something interesting because we keep going like, hey, this is a great technology, you should do it. But until you use it, you don't realize what you're missing, right? So we're going like, hey, we're able to reach out to all these people and teach them where they are now without, and then all of a sudden you're like, but they're not getting what they could have got when they were here. So let's pull back. I mean, I think that's kind of the playground analogy again. We're testing the system to see where it fits.
And I think you could probably recognize that certain mediating structures under certain circumstances are just, in the cost-benefit analysis, not amenable.
Yeah.
And so to just not, like, Shore's work actually has really convinced me that if asked to teach undergraduate online courses, I will just refuse. Because I don't think I can ethically do it. Because you can't handle the affective component of learning in that context. It's just physiologically not possible.
No, that wouldn't translate to who I am. Like, yeah. It's.
And so, like, but that doesn't mean that I don't, like, but if it was, let's say it was graduate students or a certificate program or something with adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I would consider it in that context.
Oh, sure.
But with like, freshmen or even sophomores, like to teach a core course.
Yeah, but I think at that point you're looking then again at I'm not going to say cognitive development, but cognitive reasoning maybe of why they're doing it, so they're going to give you more attention even given the online constraints.
All right, we should move on to
this. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.